Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk about the latest episode of Moon Knight. It was called The Tomb. As the episode starts, we see Horus putting the Khonshu statue on a shelf alongside what would appear to be other gods that had previously been turned into statues or imprisoned in statues, as Khonshu now is. Meanwhile, Stephen is still unconscious in the middle of the desert as Layla tries to revive him in the midst of what would appear to be the military or some such entity showing up in jeeps, at which point she draws their attention away from his motionless body, Stephen's motionless body, by confronting them with a flare before luring them near to where she is behind her own vehicle, and then throwing another flare into the back of the Jeep where it lands on a bunch of ordnance, causing it to go off and the patrol to flee. Stephen then comes to, and he and Layla proceed to the location that they learned about from moving the stars around and all that. And there's a conversation in the morning as they get to where they're going about how it really should be Mark controlling Steve's body because of what they're about to face. But Stephen not only declines to give the body over to Mark, but he's confused as to why he's still carrying Mark, in his head with Khonshu out of the picture, because he was told that once Khonshu was gone, he would get his body back without Mark in his head. And I found it interesting because once Stephen passed out after the star moving thing, wouldn't it have been a free-for-all between the two of them to see who would control the body, and wouldn't it have come down to who got to it first? And if that's the case, isn't it kind of coincidental that Steve was the first one to take control as opposed to it flipping back to Mark, who hadn't been in control when Steven passed out? Like, what are the odds that the same, persona would have the body when the body came back around that had it when it went down? Anyway, they come across an abandoned campsite at an apparent archaeological dig. And as Stephen is exploring one of the tents, he has an argument with Mark in a mirror and basically calls him a liar. And this is followed by a conversation between Layla and Stephen back outside the tent as she helps him suit up for an activity that will require a harness, apparently. And he talks about how he's thrilled to be actually on an adventure in Egypt. And he tells her how Mark is trying to protect her from being taken over by Khonshu. And their physical proximity leads them to feel some feels and experience a chemistry similar to what she and Mark had. And they kiss before Layla spelunks into a cave, after which, in her absence, Mark causes Stephen to punch himself in the face in retaliation for kissing his wife. Once Stephen joins her at the bottom of this cave, which is actually a tomb, it is discovered by them that the structure is designed in such a way as to resemble the Eye of Horus, which itself represents a version of the five human senses. And this discovery leads them to choose to go down the path that would represent the tongue, or the sense of taste, which I guess loosely refers to Amit's voice and Avatar. At the end of the path, they seem to find Amit's tomb, as well as fresh blood and freshly used canopic jars, after which they're forced to hide as what appears to be a living mummy begins to disembowel somebody on a slab in the room. When Layla inadvertently makes a noise, the mummy discovers their presence and they have to flee in separate directions. And this whole sequence is giving me serious Tomb Raider vibes, as Layla is forced to cross a chasm by hugging a wall as she walks across a really, really thin ledge, which of course has gaps in it, and which of course partially collapses at one juncture just as she moves from that juncture to the next one. So it's just a total Tomb Raider thing. And a bunch of other tomb crawler games that have the similar mechanic. When she seems to make it across to the other side, she's actually grabbed from behind through a crevice in the wall. And she then has to fight with a seemingly different living mummy, who she ultimately defeats by activating a flare and shoving it in his eye, where it explodes and, of course, incapacitates this entity. Meanwhile, Stephen stumbles into the pharaoh's chamber of the tomb and discovers that it holds the sarcophagus of Alexander the Great. We then see Layla dusting herself off after making it across the ledge and almost dying, after she's confronted by Harrow, who is also somehow there. With Mark's encouragement, Stephen opens the sarcophagus but doesn't immediately find an item called an ushabti that should be buried with Alexander the Great, and I guess with everyone that gets buried, that way, that they apparently need, and which he quickly determines was hidden down Alexander the Great's gullet. While he's retrieving it, Harrow recounts some details of the day that Layla's father died in conversation with her, which was on a dig which apparently occurred in Mark's presence, but seemingly stops short of saying that Mark killed her father. She then leaves Harrow behind and confronts Mark while he's not the dominant personality inside Stephen. She's talking to him through Stephen. And he then comes out and explains that he was there, but that the person who killed her father was actually his partner, I guess in whatever endeavor they were on, who went nuts with greed and killed everyone on the dig but him. They then hear Harrow's men approaching, at which point Layla runs to look for an exit other than the one that goes through his men so that they can both escape, as Mark deals with them sort of to hold them off, which causes him to get shot twice. We then seem to join Mark in some kind of afterlife that resembles a hospital for the mentally ill, where the residents happen to be watching an Indiana Jones type TV show called Tomb Rustler about, tomb crawling archaeologists, and where Harrow seems to be the doctor in charge, whom Mark has a sit down with after falling down as a result of being a little bit wobbly on his feet and dropping what appears to be a MoonKnight action figure, which was kind of interesting. During his conversation with this doctor, Mark seems to realize that it's actually Harrow, and he freaks out and takes off. And after a few minutes of running, he hides in a room that contains a sarcophagus in which Stephen was trapped. Happy to see each other, though they don't understand how they could possibly be both in the same place at the same time, bodily, they begin to make a collective escape from the facility, at which point they encounter a rather large bipedal talking hippopotamus known as Tawaret, and if I'm saying that right, an Egyptian deity associated with things like motherhood and childbirth, as well as resurrection and rejuvenation. And she greets our heroes with a very polite hello, much to their dismay, which causes them to simultaneously shriek with fear. And that is where the episode ends. For some reason, we didn't see MoonKnight in this episode at all, and this displeases me. But this was actually a very enjoyable episode anyway. I think it was the best episode so far. The action was crazy. The scenes between Stephen and Layla were cool. The whole talking hippopotamus thing just turned up the weird factor quite a bit. There were like horror elements with the mummy attack, and watching them figure stuff out was cool. So I just thought that this episode was excellent. The lady that plays Layla is very good. Of course, Oscar Isaacs is excellent, playing both Stephen and Mark so distinctly that you don't remember that it's the same actor, the same person, because they're so distinct in the way he portrays them, and it's really, really cool. So, the only thing that would have made it better is if MoonKnight actually showed up, which I thought was going to happen when Stephen got shot. I thought the suit was going to come on and he was going to, just be unaffected by the bullet, but it didn't happen. And so we have to wait until next week now to see how it is that he's not actually dead. And I'm guessing that, Tawaret is going to have something to do with that. She's going to make it so that they, can go on living. But apparently it's going to have to be together, right? Unless she's going to, because there's only one body. So even that they've come across a god that can bring them back to life, they can't be separated. So I'm sure they won't be happy about that. But anyway, that's really it. It was a good episode, probably the best one so far, as I said, and I will be back with a review of the next episode. There are only 2 more, so they're going to have to wrap this up pretty quick. But until then, I take my leave, and I wish you peace and long life.